This week on Obsessed with Wine.
Like I always say to my winemaking team, all we have to do is not mess it up. The moment we decide the pick is the most quality we'll ever have, and everything we do from a winemaking standpoint either preserves that quality or diminishes it. So our job as winemakers is honestly not to let the quality diminish from the moment of harvest on. That's all it is. You can't make quality into wine. It's just not possible.
Hello, wine enthusiasts. My name is Wesley Cable, and I want to welcome you to another episode of Obsessed with Wine podcast. Last week, I shared part one of my interview with Richie Allen, the talented Vice President of Winemaking and Viticulture at Rombauer Vineyards. We discussed the story of how Koerner and Joan Rombauer came to Napa Valley and established Rombauer Vineyards, made wine in their garage before the winery was built, and about what makes Rombauer such a special place for Richie. This week, I'm sharing part two of my interview with Richie. In this part of the interview, we focus on Rombauer's winemaking philosophy, why their wines are always sold out, and we talk in detail about some of their most popular wines, the Carneros Chardonnay, their wonderful lineup of Zinfandels made in the Sierra Foothills, and their award-winning Cabernet Sauvignons. So grab a glass of your favorite wine. It's time for Obsessed with Wine. So let's talk about wine making specifically. If you just had to say in a nutshell, what's the philosophy for Rombauer winemaking? How would you describe it?
I'm trying to distill it down into a really concise sentence that's really witty. I can't. I'm not that smart. From a winemaking standpoint, I always say, we control from 48 inches down in the soil, which is most of the time our effective rooting depth, to get it in the bottle. And we control every aspect from there in between. It's not about making it a certain price point. It's not about cutting costs. It's just make the best wine you can. And the philosophy, I guess, is, I touched on, we don't make components and then try and blend the wine up. We just try and make each wine the best we can so it's easy to blend. Stylistically, we know where we want to be on each wine. It's not made by committee, if that makes sense. Like the Rombauer family, we let them taste the final blend, but they don't tell us how to blend it. And honestly, they trust us enough to just let us do it. I don't like other people in the room other than Luke and Andrew, the other two winemakers, when we're blending, because we're concentrating very hard and we know what we want to achieve. Our winemaking is honestly, for all the technology we have, we keep it very, very, very simple. Like Chardonnay, I always say it goes from press to tank, tank to barrel, barrel to tank, tank to bottle. It's 5 steps. I don't know. There's no secret ingredients. There's over 200 legal additives you can add to wine. We use yeast, tartaric acid, and nitrogen for the yeast. That's it. I mean, you've seen it. There's no wacky stuff that goes in. Like it's all relatively simple. It's very simple. It's very precise. We know what we're trying to make. I don't know. It's hard to distill down to one sentence. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. One of the things I've noticed in the wineries is the use of a basket press for pressing on the reds. So what goes into the decision to use a basket press versus, say, a bladder press or something like that? Why is that so important?
A bladder press is really good for a rapid extraction of juice. When you have white grapes, for example, you don't have any alcohol, which is a solvent. You want to reduce the phenolic uptake from the skins. So a rapid extraction is ideal. And so a pneumatic airbag press gives you that. When you're making red wine and you're pressing off at the end of the ferment, you have alcohol, which is a solvent, and that affects the extraction. So if you use a bladder press, that quick extraction or that quick pressing of the juice, roll, crumble, roll, crumble, roll, crumble, is very harsh on the skins. And you end up with a lower quality press wine, which is quite cloudy and has a lot of solids in it, a lot more tannin. When you use a basket press, it's a lot more gentle, it's a slower extraction, and the wine filters through the skins, and it's more oxidative on the tannin. So when a red wine's young, you can add a lot of oxygen to it and not harm it. For all of our red wines, we want, because of the alcohol that's present, we want this very soft, gentle extraction, and that's why we use a basket press. When I worked at Penfolds, that was all we had, was a basket press at McGill. When I got to Sierra Valley, we had pneumatic airbag presses, and we'd always have to keep the pressing separate. When I got to Rombauer, I was like, wow, they've got a basket press. Fantastic. That'll give you much better press wine from your reds. Much, much better, much high quality. My second year at Rombauer, we got a second when I took over, I added a third and a fourth. And so all of our red wines, we could basket press them. And it just gives, it's really simple, right? It just makes better wine. So
Yeah.
do it. It's slower. It's lower yielding. So you get a lower yield per ton of juice or wine. It's way more labor intensive, but it makes better wine.
Well, and that's the most important thing. So
Yeah.
They're cool machines, though. I mean, I was impressed with the basket press and just the whole process, and like the big cake that comes out at the end and all that stuff is super
pancake.
cool.
You should see it sometimes when we're making Joy, our dessert, our Botrytis Chardonnay dessert wine. We'll press that in the tank, and then occasionally, if we have really, really high botrytis, it's hard to extract all of that really concentrated juice. So we'll actually press it in the tank press, dump all the skins out, and then put them in the basket press and press it for 2 or 3 days. And it's just like this very long, we just press it at a high pressure, constant for 48 hours.
Wow.
And you end up with this like brown rock that comes out. And when you dump it out, it does you see it when you dump the cake out into the truck, it breaks up.
Right.
The Joy cake never breaks up.
It just falls like a big rock.
It's like a giant rock. It's like a giant brownie. And it stays like that, like in the compost pile for a couple of weeks before it starts to crumble. It's quite incredible.
That's pretty cool.
The cake is pretty cool.
So I got to ask you, because I've noticed a lot of wines that are sold out for Rombauer, which I think maybe is a good problem to have because people like it and they buy it. But my question to you is, why is it sold out? And is it a matter of just we need to find out a way to make more wine? Or is it we're happy with making what we make, and if it's sold out, then the next vintage will make more?
It's a little bit of both. So we always try and make the most wine possible at a quality level. So, with Chardonnay, we're almost sold out of Chardonnay. It's getting pretty tight. I think there's a 2-bottle limit at the winery. We would love to have made more. It was a smaller vintage. But also in any given year, if there's something that's not, say we take on a new vineyard or it's a vineyard we've been working with for a couple of years, we haven't quite dialed in the winemaking for that site. If it's not up to a quality standpoint, we will sell it off as bulk wine on the bulk market, and it doesn't go into our blends because we want to maintain the quality. So there's that. The other one is to make wine at the level that we're making is somewhat limiting. So it's hard to make more of it. So it's a slow progression. Honestly, the last 3 years, I remember at the start of the pandemic, we didn't know what to do. We had crisis meetings. What if sales tank? What if everybody loses their job? What if we have to downsize the company? Like, where can we make cuts? How quickly can we cut production? And we didn't cut production, thank God, but it caught us off guard how fast our wines were selling. So we're trying to make more, but if the quality is not there, we won't bottle it because it's just not worth it. We want to protect the quality above all. So yeah, a lot of the wines are sold out. We're finishing up another bottling season here in the next 2 months, and so they'll be restocked. But yeah, I guess they just taste too good and people are enjoying them too much.
Right.
We're not doing it by choice. I'll put it that way.
Right. Okay. All right. You're not limiting production by choice.
No.
Okay.
No, we're limiting production from a quality standpoint if we can't maintain the quality. But if the quality is there, we're not selling off extra wine or not crushing the fruit. It is honestly hard. We can only acquire vineyards so quickly that are up to our quality level. We can only acquire fruit on the open market slowly, because if it's a new vineyard, we don't want to buy 200 tons from a new vineyard and not know the quality. So it's this slow, progressive, constant growth. We're keeping up, sort of.
So I think a lot of wineries, I was going to ask you about the 2020 vintage, especially red wines. A lot of companies, I think, are saying no to any red wines for 2020 based on all the smoke and that kind of stuff. So will we see any red wines from Rombauer for 2020?
Yeah. So smoke taint, it's interesting. So there's a lot of factors that play into, especially a red wine or any wine, any grape picking up smoke taint. We know that variety plays a part. So different varieties are more affected by smoke taint. If you could have Chardonnay and Zinfandel at one end, which are relatively less affected, they can still pick up smoke taint, but they're less affected. And Pinot Noir and Cabernet Franc and Petit Verdot at the other end, especially Pinot Noir, a little bit of smoke seems to heavily affect them more than, say, Chardonnay. The other things that come into play are the density of the smoke, the length of exposure. There's some anecdotal evidence that the freshness of the smoke plays a part. But if you have a long enough exposure, it doesn't matter how fresh the smoke is, you can still pick up the density of the smoke. So it's very hard to predict from a winemaking standpoint when a wine or grapes or vines are exposed to smoke, how much smoke they're going to pick up. There's also the period in which they're exposed. So if it's pre-veraison, grapes tend to not be affected. Post-veraison, and veraison is that point where they start to soften and accumulate sugar. If they're red grapes, develop color. The point when you start veraison is when they're most affected, and it decreases slightly as you get to harvest, but there's still a very high risk. Knowing all those things, it's very hard to predict. So 2020, most of our Chardonnay, honestly, was totally fine. We lost about 15% of our Sauvignon Blanc because it was more affected by smoke taint. Our Cabernet and Merlot were totally destroyed. They were exposed twice for very long periods of time, very close proximity to high density smoke, and it wasn't worth it. Now the Zinfandel is less affected. Now Zinfandel comes from the Sierra Foothills, and so they were a lot further from the fires. They did get some smoky days, but not enough density of smoke or freshness of smoke, and the variety doesn't pick it up. So our 2020 Zinfandels were okay. That being said, the Petite Syrah from up there for 2020, we had to sell off and destroy. We'll have a Zinfandel for 2020. It actually tastes quite amazing. Very proud of it. We just bottled it recently. The Cab and the Merlot, it just wasn't worth it. There was nothing we could do. It's interesting. In 2020, we sent samples all over the world to Australia. We're using labs here. We were testing, and we started to develop our own internal protocols for what level of bound and free smoke compounds are acceptable in wines, what we figured our background, because you'll always have some background smoke in any grape variety when you test it. And so we had to sort of figure out very quickly what was acceptable, what was background, what was actual smoke taint. Were we willing to run the risk of bottling something with smoke taint? And the Rombauer family were like, why would you do that? Don't do that. Why would you run the risk? Like, we're 40 years in. Why would you risk it now? That's a great example of why I work for the Rombauer family. They're like, why would you risk bottling a wine that could be bad for customers? Don't do that. Now, other companies, they'll be forced to. Maybe they're hoping. Maybe they weren't anywhere near the fires and they are okay. But there's a lot of people who will be forced to bottle wines, unfortunately, which are no good. And we're in a lucky position. We didn't have to do that.
So for somebody like you who has a trained palate, how obvious is smoke taint in a wine? I mean, is it pretty obvious?
Yeah. The thing with smoke taint is when a wine is young, it's very, very fruity, and the smoke taint exists in a wine in two forms. There's the free form and the bound form. And what happens over time is the free form is what you can smell and has a large impact on the flavor. And over time, those bound compounds disassociate from the glycosylated sugars and become free forms, and it gets worse with time. So when the wine is young, it can be a little bit hard to see. It's more of a textural thing, and it builds on the palate when you taste, and it's pretty unmistakable. It's like a dirty ashtray. But if it's light smoke taint, sometimes it can be a bit hard to see. But over time, it gets worse. And what we generally see is once the wine goes through malolactic fermentation and you start to get about 12 months into its aging process, we really start to see it, if it's a small amount of taint, come out. Once it's in bottle, it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse over time. We've looked at reverse osmosis to remove it, changing our winemaking protocols. We tried a new process last year, putting the grapes in containers and exposing them to ozone to oxidize it prior to fermentation. I'm yet to find the silver bullet. Asked to be on a panel next week to talk about smoke taint with other winemakers, but we don't have enough data that's conclusive to say, here's what's happening exactly, and here's what we're going to do to fix it. What I really honestly think will happen in the future with smoke taint is there'll be a combination of techniques in the vineyard to protect grapes from smoke, and then treatments in the winery to reduce the extract or remove the free forms of the smoke compounds and try and save grapes. But you also have to remember, smoke is made up of thousands of chemical compounds, and right now we test for 7 out of thousands. So it's really hard to get a very accurate picture. But the palate never lies, right? If you taste it and it's ashy, it's smoke taint. There's not much you can do about it. Unfortunately, it's one of those things we're going to be dealing with it a long time. I've dealt with it a lot in Australia and a handful of times over here, but there's no silver bullet yet.
So I want to talk about the specific Rombauer wines, and I will tell you this, and I'm not saying this to you just because you're here, but Rombauer is probably the only winery that I've been to that from top to bottom, I like every single wine. I mean, like that's hard.
Good. That means I'm doing my job.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I want to ask you about some of the wines. Now, specifically, I think the first thing to start off with is the Chardonnay, the Carneros Chardonnay. So when I talk to people about Chardonnay, Rombauer is always like one of the most talked about, Chardonnays, and people, as it's known as one of the best. So the fruit is from Carneros. That's where it comes from, right? So what makes Carneros such a great place for Chardonnay?
Yeah, I mean, it's a couple of things. One, it's the soils in Carneros. So the main soil type in Carneros is a clay loam. The soil series is called Hare Clay Loam. It's named after the Hare family. We work with Jim Hare. We actually just acquired 60 acres of land from Jim Hare. So we're looking for this particular type of clay, which is really good for making round, rich, ripe Chardonnays. The other thing that's really unique in Carneros is its proximity to San Pablo Bay. So it's a cooler area. Napa Carneros is cool in the rest of Napa Valley. Sonoma Carneros is slightly cooler again. And Carneros stretches both Napa and Sonoma counties. But it's that because it's at the bottom of the Napa and Sonoma valleys on San Pablo Bay, you have this more moderate climate. So the whites tend to retain more acid, but it's still relatively sunny in the afternoon and quite warm in the afternoon, so you can get fully physiologically ripe Chardonnay. That soil that we're looking for in combination with the proximity to the bay and that warm during the afternoon, mild in the morning and evening gives us the ripeness that we want to make California Chardonnay. What's really interesting is with Rombauer Chardonnay, it's really a strip. It's about 5 miles north to south and 20 miles east to west roughly, where we source and own all of our Chardonnay. And when we deviate outside that, the climate changes too much. I mean, we can't go very far south because we end up in the bay, but when we go too far north or we get onto certain soil types, the Chardonnay doesn't have the character that we're looking for from a flavor profile and a richness to make Rombauer Chardonnay. So we can't do it in Russian River. We can't do it on the Central Coast. It's stylistically different. And it's that uniqueness there that gives us the richness that we're looking for.
Now, obviously, you guys are great at what you do, and that's not in question. But what makes it so special and so popular? Because literally, it's so popular, and it's, like I said, every time I talked about Chardonnay, people talk about Rombauer. So what do you think that is?
Well, I think some people love it and some people hate it.
Yeah.
And I honestly find the people that hate it need to taste it blind against their favorite wines, and it'll be eye-opening for them, because I've done this with everyone from consumers to master somms to other winemakers, and tried the wine blind with people who love to dislike it, and they're pleasantly surprised when they taste it blind. But what I think it is it has an innate balance and a richness to the wine. When we talk about Rombauer Chardonnay, we talk about 5 core components. The first one is ripe fruit. We want to have physiologically ripe fruit. Not high alcohol, but physiologically ripe, because it has the flavor that we're looking for. The next one is we want a creamy mid-palate, and that comes from the Lee stirring we do in barrel ferment. We put it through malolactic fermentation, so it softens the wine. Malolactic fermentation also enhances the varietal character. And a byproduct, if you do it right, is a little bit of diacetyl, which is the butteriness. That tends to come out when the wine's got a bit more bottle age on it. The 2020 is only just starting to show that. The next one is the type of oak we use. We're very, very specific about the oak. It's a very soft oak that is low in phenolics, so it doesn't make the wine harsh, but it has a rich, sweet vanilla character to it. And then we have enough acid to hold it all together. So it's very hard to tell what's ripe fruit, what's creamy mid-palate, what's vanilla oak, what's the buttery finish. It's really hard to tell because they blend seamlessly on the palate, but then it has enough acid to make it refreshing. And I always say if you have those 5 core components in balance, you have Rombauer Chardonnay. If they're not in balance, you have one of our competitors.
Well, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, no, that's interesting.
Richness and balance, honestly, is what it comes down to.
So as far as the practice of farming and just the winemaking process, since you've been there 20 years, has it changed a lot, or is it pretty much the same deal?
The winemaking is identical to how we've always done it. From when we started making Chardonnay, this style in 1990. The barrel component is almost identical. We've actually refined not so much the amount of new oak, but the selection of new oak and how that wood is seasoned over the last 15 years to try and give it a softness and a richness, yet still maintain that Rombauer-esque character. But honestly, I really think the big thing that has changed over the last 20 years is what we do in the vineyard and how we source the grapes, how we grow the grapes. The vine age, like our average vine age for Rombauer Chardonnay is approaching 18 years now, which is quite old for Napa Valley. So there's inherent richness in the wine. But in terms of winemaking, I mean, it's still handpicked. It's all handpicked. It's whole cluster pressed the same way it always has been. It's barrel fermented. It's lee stirred every week. It still goes through malo. Some of it gets inoculated. Some of it doesn't. Like the winemaking side of it is pretty rock solid. And it's honestly very, very basic because we start with really high quality fruit. The winemaking, we're not trying to manufacture quality into it. We just let it do its thing and it tastes the way it should. Like it's growing in the sunshine of Carneros on clay soils exactly the way it should.
So it really is then the fruit that makes the most difference. And the reason I say that is because we have a local winery here, this great little winery close to me, and it's a little family-run winery, and the wife said to the husband, I want you to make Rombauer Chardonnay. Like that was her request, right? And so here he is trying to make it and all that stuff, right? But it's really the fruit that makes the difference.
Oh, yeah, it is. Absolutely. If you don't have enough fruit concentration, you can't stand up to the winemaking techniques. And if you have really high fruit concentration, honestly, like I always say to my winemaking team, all we have to do is not mess it up. The moment we decide the pick is the most quality we'll ever have, and everything we do from a winemaking standpoint either preserves that quality or diminishes it. So our job as winemakers is honestly not to let the quality diminish from the moment of harvest on. That's all it is. You can't make quality into wine. It's just not possible.
I'm a huge California Chardonnay fan, just the style, right? It seems like to me that more and more people, there's kind of like this movement of wine consumers that are kind of moving away from this California style to different style Chardonnays. Now, obviously, if you're sold out of Chardonnay, that doesn't mean that people aren't buying it. But do you see that too? Like there's kind of this transition to people who are trying to find something different than what they call the California style Chardonnay.
Yeah, I mean, we see it, absolutely. Well, I'd say we're aware of it. And there's people who love to say, well, I don't drink Chardonnay, anything but Chardonnay. And my argument to that is if you're not going to drink Chardonnay, you are missing out on the one varietal that makes a more diverse selection of wine styles than any other varietal in the world. You can make everything from sparkling wine to dessert wine with Chardonnay. California Chardonnay and even Rombauer Chardonnay, if you want to take that as the quintessential Rombauer Chardonnay, is a specific style. But you know what? There's plenty of people who love Rombauer Chardonnay who don't like Burgundy. And that's fine. That's totally fine. There's plenty of people who love Burgundy will never drink Rombauer Chardonnay. More power to them. But you know what? In Burgundy, they cannot make California-style Chardonnay. And they sure as hell can't make Rombauer Chardonnay. They don't have the same soils and they don't have the climate. But you know what I can't do in Carneros? I can't make Burgundy. I can't. If I try and make a Burgundy-style Chardonnay, it's going to be pretty shit.
Yeah.
So why would I deliberately make a style of wine that isn't suited to the climate? Doesn't make sense. All we're doing is trying to optimize the fruit in the region that we have to make the highest quality wine possible. Now, if you don't like it, that's totally fine. We're not going to force it down your throat. But don't poo-poo the wine because you don't like it. It's incredibly high quality. It's made by hand with a huge amount of attention to detail, which is more I can say for a lot of other small wineries or big wineries. And it's done like optimized all the way through to make the best possible wine. And honestly, I was with a friend a couple of weeks ago who, I won't name the winery, but he works for a very small, very, very, very high-end Napa Cabernet producer, one of the top 4 or 5. And he goes, I'd love to come out to some Chardonnay vineyards and see what you're doing because I have to make a little bit of Chardonnay. And so we spent a morning together going around the vineyards, and he was blown away. He's like, you do as much in care and attention to detail in your Chardonnay vineyards as we do on our $500 a bottle Cabernet vineyards. He goes, I just assumed when the vineyard got to 15, 20 years of age, you just push it down because it wasn't producing enough and everything was machine harvested and all this. I said, no, man, this is all done by hand. We just do it at a scale bigger than you. That's all it is. And he was blown away. When people rip on us, I don't know. It's in Australia, we call it tall poppy syndrome. You can look that up what that means, but no, it's,
Okay.
we're just trying to make the best wine possible. And if you don't like it, that's fine. There's plenty of amazing, amazing Chardonnays out there. Like our favorite, honestly, our favorite thing to do at the winery is taste Chardonnays blind from all over the world. It's just such an incredible variety that makes so many different wine styles, and it's so well traveled. There's no other variety that you can plant in as diverse selection of soils and as diverse selection of climates as Chardonnay. And to say, oh, I don't like Chardonnay or I don't like California Chardonnay, I just think is so narrow-minded and ridiculous that it's silly.
Well, it's very successful, obviously, and it has been for many years. So my last question on the Chardonnay, though, is how does that make you feel, though, knowing that just year after year it's doing well and it's winning awards and people love it? Like, does that give you any satisfaction?
Yeah, it's satisfying, right? But you know what the most satisfying thing is? When you're in a restaurant and you see someone order a bottle and then another bottle and then another bottle, and then you're like, haha, I did my job.
That's cool.
I don't know. Yes, it's nice to get good reviews and good scores and get accolades and the wine sells out, but honestly, the most satisfying thing is that moment you get it in the bottle and you know you've done everything you can to get it to that point, and then your job is done. And you know you've done a good job, and you know in your heart of hearts whether you've made a great wine or you haven't. And we're never pressured to put something in the bottle that we don't feel is great. And getting it in the bottle is honestly for me the most satisfying moment. Like, I really enjoy putting wine in the bottle because my work is done.
Yeah, right. So let me ask you this, and let's move on to Sauvignon Blanc, because I know that's the newest kind of varietal that you guys have there. And what I thought was interesting is it's an 86% stainless steel ferment, 10% neutral French oak, and some concrete. And so I was going to ask you just specifically, what is the concrete and the little bit of French oak? What does that do for the Sauvignon Blanc that you can't get with the stainless steel tanks?
So stainless steel when you ferment in stainless steel white wines, which is very modern, you get a very linear, very focused, lean, tightly wound wine. And what we're always trying to do is build in layers of texture into the wine. When we ferment in old barrels, we don't get any oak flavor, but we get a broader, rounder texture on the wine. It gives a little more richness. So that's why we use the barrel component. The oak component is very subliminal, if that makes sense. Like, you don't know it's there, but if we showed you a wine without it, you'd be like, oh, I see what it does now. So it's hidden in the wine and it makes it richer without you knowing. The concrete started as a trial. There's lots of winemaking folklore that when you ferment in concrete, it gives you a richer wine, minerality to it, or whatever.
I've heard that.
Yeah, it doesn't actually work that way. But when you ferment in concrete is very high in carbonate and potassium and calcium carbonate, which you use to remove acid from wine. So when you ferment it in concrete, the reason you got this richer wine was because more acid would drop out, and so you'd end up with a lower titratable acidity, which would make the wine seem fatter. So it's actually just someone's poor understanding of wine chemistry that started that rumor. It seems to be prevalent throughout California. The minerality aspect, minerality is very hard to define from a chemical or scientific standpoint, but it definitely adds something to the wine. What we do with the concrete lots is we generally pick a handful of small lots that are very, very high in acid, knowing that it will drop out a little bit of acid, and it gives us a wine which is richer, but not necessarily rounder like we see with the barrel component. So it adds this extra layer and dimension to the finished wine when we blend it in without you knowing it's there. So if you had that wine on the bench, blind with a whole bunch of other Sauvignon Blancs, you would never go, oh, this wine, it's got a little bit of concrete and it's got a little bit of barrel. You wouldn't know it's there because we're just trying to very subtly build in this layer of texture without you knowing. And that's why we use it. It's very subtle. It's very subliminal. But we just want a wine that's a little bit richer and rounder than if you did it in a stainless steel tank. And it's a very easy way to do it without complicating things immensely. And the reason those percentages are the way they are is because that's how many concrete tanks we have.
Okay. That
and
helps.
it works. And the barrel component, I just always liked a small amount, and so it's always been around 10%. So,
Well, it's a great Sauvignon Blanc. And like I said, I'm not saying this because you're on here, but it's one of my favorite Sauvignon Blancs. So I actually look forward to when it comes out. It's great.
it's caught us off guard. So, it's our newest wine, and for a few years there, we didn't make a lot of it, and it was sort of like it wasn't selling that great, and like everybody loved it, but nobody knew about it. And then all of a sudden, the last 3 years, it's like word on the street is Rombauer makes Sauvignon Blanc, and like it's just gone crazy. And we could make 3 times as much and still not have enough. It's actually become a big problem internally at the company because it has become so popular, and people are like, why does it taste so good? And honestly, I know you're like, oh, you do a little bit of oak, you do a little bit in concrete, but the winemaking is really, really simple. We only use one yeast strain. It's all fermented at low temperatures, and we get the juice relatively clear before fermentation. We let it settle for 4 days, and then just don't mess it up. It's really, really simple. I don't understand how you could mess up Sauvignon Blanc so bad, but I always say to like my young winemaking interns that come work for us for Harvest, I say the most important thing you can learn while you're here is how to make aromatic white wine. If you can master making aromatic white wine, because it's so technically simple, but it's very, very precise. If you can learn how to make a good aromatic white wine, everything else will be easy. But unless you can master those basic skills in winemaking, you'll probably never be a great winemaker. So generally the first one I always want people to learn how to make is an aromatic white wine, because it gives you a very good understanding of wine chemistry.
Hey, Obsessed with Wine listeners. I just wanted to take a second to thank you for your overwhelming support of the podcast and the daily taste segments. It's been amazing. I can't believe how fast this show has grown and how many listeners have taken the time to contact me with their feedback. If you like this show, I would love for you to share it with a few of your wine-loving friends or family members so they can experience it for themselves. Don't forget to sign up for the email list on the show website at www.obsessedwithwine.net, as the first giveaways of Obsessed with Wine merchandise and wine gift cards will be at the end of this month. Thank you so much again. Now back to the great Richie Allen. So my favorite wine, period, of all the wines I've had in my life is Twin Rivers Zinfandel. So, and that may surprise you, maybe it doesn't surprise you, but
no, it's a very popular wine.
and it's always sold out. So last time I was there, I got a magnum of it because I knew that it was probably
Wesley,
not going to be
you have
long.
my email. You can get bottles if you need.
So what I want to know is, so Zinfandel is, other than the Chardonnay, believe it or not, everybody I talk to about Rombauer, and we have a great conversation about it, the Zinfandel is so popular and people absolutely love all the Zinfandels that you make. So why is that? Why is it so great?
I think, honestly, with the Zin, again, it starts in the vineyard. You'll notice the Chardonnay comes from Carneros. The Cabernet comes from Napa Valley proper. Sauvignon Blanc was originally the southern end of Napa because it's a bit cooler. But now we're moving into Sonoma where it's even cooler to source higher quality fruit. We're actually acquiring vineyards in Sonoma Valley into Russian River specifically for Sauvignon Blanc because we feel it's better there for it. And the Zinfandel, we honestly feel that the Sierra Foothills, specifically Amador and El Dorado County, because of the climate and the particular type of soil there, which is decomposed granite, like it's a sandy loam called Shenandoah series, we just feel that's the best for growing Zin. If you think about it from a historical standpoint, the best vineyards up there that are still in the ground are Zinfandel.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are planted pre-Second World War and they've stood the test of time. So they've worked out very early on through chance and luck, honestly, a lot of it, because science wasn't what it is today back then, that variety is ideally suited to that soil and climate. And through pure chance, there's all this great old vine Zinfandel up there that makes, I think, some of the best undervalued wines in the world. If those old vine Zinfandel vineyards were in Europe and they're 100 years old, those wines would be thousands of dollars a bottle. And they're not. They're under $40. A lot of them are 25. And they're like 100-year-old vineyard Zinfandel. Now, where else in the world does that happen? Nowhere. It just doesn't. And that's what I think the secret of the Zin is, anywhere from 20 to 30% of the blend, depending on the year, is old vine Zinfandel. The climate up there is ideally suited to Zinfandel. And that's why we source the fruit from up there. We make I said winemaking Rombauer is very, very simple. But if you look at where the wines come from, there's a method to the madness. We're very regionally specific about where we source varieties because that's what they do well. We don't source Sauvignon Blanc in the Sierra Foothills. We don't source Chardonnay in the Sierra Foothills or Cabernet because they're not suited to that soil and climate. But Zinfandel and to a lesser extent Barbera are a perfect variety to grow up there, and that's why we're there. That's why we've invested over the last 20 years in buying vineyards up there, in buying and building a winery, because we feel that's the best place in the world to do Zinfandel. If it was the best place in the world to do Grenache, we'd be doing Grenache up there.
So let me ask you about Zinfandel real quick, because it's one of the it's like the higher alcohol wine. And so my question to you is that just because of the variety, or what makes it such high alcohol?
Partly the variety. So Zinfandel tends to reach physiological ripeness at very high sugar levels. The clusters are somewhat, or the berries, because they're large, thin-skinned berries, are susceptible to berry collapse, so where they shrivel, and so they lose water, so you end up with very high sugar levels. And we just feel because of that, in the climate it makes a better wine when we let it ripen to a higher degree. Now, we would never do that with say Chardonnay or Cabernet, because the variety doesn't respond the same way to the heat, but Zinfandel it does. And so because of that higher sugar, you inherently end up with higher alcohol. Now, that being said, if alcohol gets too high in a wine, it can actually thin the wine out. So as alcohol increases in any wine as you're fermenting, it builds body and depth into the wine. But once you get to a tipping point, it starts to thin the wine out and become thin, and then even to a larger extent, alcoholic and warm, like it burns. Now, we sort of try to carry as much alcohol as we can based on the fruit intensity. And the higher the fruit intensity, the more alcohol you can carry. So the higher quality fruit you have, the more alcohol you can carry. So with Zinfandel, we know that we can carry around 15 to 15.7% alcohol, depending on the vineyard, if we have the right fruit intensity. We know we can do that with Zinfandel, and so we, again, try and make the best wine we can. We're not trying to make it a low alcohol Zinfandel because philosophically that's what I want to make. We just make the best wine we can, and so that's what we do.
Well, I could talk about Zinfandel for like 2 hours, but I'm not going to.
So could I, actually. Maybe we should do this again and talk about Zin.
We should, yeah. So I want to move on because you guys make fantastic Cabernets, and I'm really impressed with all the Cabernets, from the Napa Valley Cabernet, Atlas Peak, Stice Lane. I think a week ago I opened a Stice Lane here, for the family, had a party, and it was excellent. So can you just talk a little bit about what goes into making the Cabernets? And I've noticed that, like, at least for like the single vineyard Cabernets, the Atlas and the Stice and the Diamond Selection, it's all 100% new French oak. Why is that?
So with Zinfandel, we feel like Chardonnay, we feel that we have a certain particular blend of French and American barrels that we use, and they're about a third new. With Zinfandel, we don't want to overpower the wine, so we tend to use 4-year-old barrels that are sort of at the end of their useful lifespan for us, and just a small amount of new American, just to add a bit of sweetness. But with Cabernet, because of the flavors of the varietal and the flavors of the barrel, we feel that French oak pairs better with that particular varietal. And Cabernet, again, it's very regionally specific. So we know on the valley floor and on the hillsides in Napa Valley that Cabernet excels. It's honestly, like, if you were to look at the data around great wines and their phenolic structure, so how much tannin and color they have, the Napa Valley, if more is better, the Napa Valley is the best place in the world to grow Cabernet. So that's why we grow Cabernet here in Napa, because it does so well. We don't grow Pinot Noir on the valley floor because it would be disgusting. It just wouldn't, it's not suitable. Yes. So the first vineyards Rombauer ever acquired were actually Cabernet vineyards. And when Koerner started buying vineyards, when he first started to make a little bit of money investing back in his company and paid off some of his loans, he started buying vineyards for Cabernet in the Napa Valley. And so now we have Cabernet vineyards that we own that span the length and breadth of the Napa Valley. So from up in Calistoga all the way down past Stag's Leap is where we source Cabernet from. we're looking for well-drained alluvial soils. So these washed fans or residual soils that are washed in place or eroded in place, lots of gravel that drain really well so the Cabernet doesn't have wet feet, and areas where there's enough heat summation that we can get it ripe. Not all of Napa Valley, God bless its soul, is perfect for growing Cabernet. There's more desirable soils and soils that should not be used for growing grapes in Napa. We are only looking at specific soil types to grow Cabernet because we know it does well. And I can literally walk in to a vineyard, pull an app up on my phone, check the prevailing soil type, and say yay or nay without even knowing any more, because we're looking for certain soil types. If we've got the right soil we want, then we'll do more investigation. Where is it? What clones they have? What rootstocks? What's the health of the vineyard? Who's farming it? There's all different factors that go into it. But the first thing we always look at is, do they have a soil type which we feel grows the right Cabernet? And that's where we start, is with the soil. So, I mean, that's the reality of it, is good soil, good farming. And, you know, it's all handpicked. Like all the red wines, they're all optically sorted. The reserve wines, we tend to do a larger portion of barrel ferment because there's so much fruit concentration, it can stand up to new French oak barrels for fermentation. But the blending of it is really simple. If it tastes good, it goes together. If it doesn't taste good, don't put it together.
It doesn't go together. So the diamond selection, which is part of the Cabernet Club, you usually get some diamond selection in that. So I think that is, if it's not the what you guys call the best of the cellar, it's got a French name that I can't say.
Le Merdichet.
Yeah. So those are what you, I guess, would be the highest end Cabernets that you have. So
yeah.
What is so special that gets to go into the diamond? Is it just the best of all the Cabernets get to go into that? How does that come about?
You know, in any given year for Cabernet and Zinfandel, at the end of the harvest, we'll usually have about 60 to 70 different lots to blend with. So sections of a vineyard or a block that we've picked, fermented, and kept separate. And we'll come and taste those, and we'll start our blending process. So the first thing we do is we identify all the lots we feel are high quality based on taste. We'll segregate those aside. Then we'll blend together wines that we feel are good for the classic Napa Valley Cabernet and will easily make the grade. We'll keep some stuff separate, which maybe the quality's there, maybe it's not. And then there'll be everything which we know is not good enough to blend into Rombauer, which will be put on the bulk market and sold. So once we've got all those high quality lots separated, we'll come back and we'll taste those again another day, and we'll start formalizing blends. So with Diamond and Le Merdichet, we're looking for the highest quality lots. So the lots that have the most natural depth and concentration on the palate, the highest fruit intensity, but the best balance naturally. So we don't have to really mess around. Maybe this one's more tannic. Maybe this one's less tannic. Maybe this one's higher in acid, and trying to blend them together. We're just looking for lots that have natural balance by themselves. Once we've sort of got those lots identified, we'll start blending them on the bench and go, yeah, those lots work well together. Maybe for Diamond, we'll take these 5 lots, which are 5 of the best lots, and we'll put those together. So then we go into the cellar and we start going through barrels. And within those 5 lots, there might be 150, say 200 barrels. And we'll go through and taste all the barrels. And we'll select out the ones that have the best balance and the most depth and concentration. Those will go into Diamond. If it's something that's truly exceptional when we're tasting through those barrels, that'll get segregated again for tasting later and go into Le Merdichet. So it's this methodical tasting and selection process to get those wines blended. And it's actually the same for the Eldorado, Twin Rivers Zinfandel, the same for any of the reserve Chardonnays. We're just looking for those best lots, and from those best lots, the best barrels that have the perfect balance to go on those wines. So it's a lot of tasting. It's a lot of understanding what you're trying to achieve from a wine quality standpoint, and then knowing the target you have to hit, and then hitting it.
So as far as diamond selection and I won't even begin to say it, the best of the cellar.
Say LMDC.
Yeah,
that's what
LMDC.
the winemaking thing.
Yeah, they're both fantastic. But my question to you on those 2 wines is: are they made every year, or some years you just don't have it and you can't make them?
They're not made every year. So some years we won't make them. More often than not, what happens is we'll have a small amount we feel is high enough quality, and the production volumes will vary based on the amount of high quality wine we have. So some years Diamond might only be 1,000 cases. Some years it might be 2,000 cases. Some years the LMDC might be 700 cases. Some years it might be 120 cases. It really depends on how much high quality wine's available. If there's not enough, we just don't. If the quality's not there, we just don't make it. There's always vintage variation. Honestly, some years are, even with that amount of selection, and downsizing based on quality, there's still like some years are better than others. And sometimes hindsight's 2020. Like we made an LMDC in 2011, and it's actually tasting really, really good. But in 2011, I was really umming and ahhing about making it. In 2005, we didn't even make an LMDC. And it was easy, like, to go to Rombauer family and say, hey, here's what we've come up with. We don't think it's good enough to bottle. We don't want to bottle it. And it's funny. They'll always like taste it and go, okay. It's the greatest luxury we have as a winemaker working for family-owned companies, that they trust us enough to let us make those decisions.
So the last wine I'm going to ask you about real quick is another one of my favorites. It's the Joy, which we talked about earlier, the late harvest Chardonnay. It's one of my favorite wines. And for people, even my friends who don't like wine, they like Joy. And so we usually have some extra around here for them. For some reason, and I don't know why it is, people are against dessert wines, like, oh, I don't drink it, it's too sweet, whatever, right? And I'm a huge fan of late harvest and dessert wines. And so anyway, if you could just really quickly talk about that. And unfortunately, it's always sold out. Like right now it's sold out, so you can't even buy it. But anyway,
we're going to bottle it. Actually, we're going to bottle the 2021 Wednesday next week. So it'll be out later in the year. Just so you know, cool. Wesley.
Awesome, because I'm going to get some. So tell me a little bit about that. For people who aren't familiar maybe with a late harvest wine or that kind of thing, tell us a little bit about how that's made and a little bit about that wine.
Yeah, so the Joy is a Botrytis Chardonnay dessert wine. So to make a dessert wine in a Botrytis style, you have to have moldy grapes effectively. But you have to have a particular type of mold. And it's called Botrytis. Botrytis is something you usually don't want on grapes, but if it's done right, it actually gives you very, very sweet grapes. If you look at the top wines of the world that are made in this style, the region you go to is Sauternes in Bordeaux. And one of the most famous, most expensive wines, long-lived wines in the bottle, known to man, is Chateau d'Yquem. And that's actually a Botrytis Sauvignon Blanc blend. There's maybe a little bit of muscat on there occasionally. But what Botrytis is, it's this mold that grows on the skins of the grapes. It gets under the skin, spreads under the skin, and then it sporulates and pierces the skin. And when it sporulates, those piercings through the skin allow the grape to dehydrate and lose moisture and concentrate. And it doesn't just concentrate the sugar, it concentrates the acid as well. The challenge is you have to have the right climatic conditions to do it. You need misty, foggy, humid mornings and warm, sunny afternoons. And they get this in Sauternes regularly. And we actually get it in Carneros. But what we're always trying to do is open the canopies up, expose the grapes to sun, use various products, sometimes fungicides or organic sulfur sprays, to stop this mold growing. But if you can get the grapes ripe and then get the mold, you can make a Botrytis Chardonnay. The challenge is getting them ripe first and then getting the Botrytis to grow, because you don't always get the right climatic conditions. Usually in Carneros, we have the right conditions and we're trying to prevent it. The challenge for us is getting the grapes ripe first. So we have this old block of Chardonnay in our Buckley Station vineyard, the southernmost vineyard in Napa Valley. This block was planted in 1989. It's actually the southernmost block of Chardonnay or grapes in the Napa Valley. It's below the reservoir, so it gets a lot of humid flow. And so all we have to do is get these grapes ripe. What happens usually is towards the end of the harvest, we don't get as much fog. So what we do is we have these overhead sprinklers that we just every 3 or 4 days turn these sprinklers on to wet everything down to make it moist, like there's this misty fog, and increase the humidity. And then we get these sunny afternoons, so we can get the Botrytis to grow. The other challenge is you're getting late in the season, right? And if you get heavy rain, the grapes are so soft that they start to split, and you start getting aspergillus and these other molds, black mold, Acetobacter bacteria, which makes the grapes rot and start to turn the vinegar. So the trick is to get Botrytis to grow under the skin, sporulate without splitting the grape. If you can do that and you get through all of that, you end up with these very disgusting looking, shriveled, furry, brown, sunken, disgusting looking clusters. But what's inside is this liquid gold, and it's very, very concentrated grape juice. So concentrated sugar, acid, and flavor. The trick is to get it out of the skins very rapidly and press it very hardly, but very gently. So it comes into the winery. It all has to be handpicked. We dump it in the press. Like, you need to wear an N95 mask because spores just go everywhere. And if you have an allergy, it's like your worst nightmare. Once it's in the press, normally we press Chardonnay for an hour and a half. With Joy, we'll press it for about 5 to 7 hours. If it's really, really a really concentrated year, we'll then dump the press and basket press it for another 2 days. And the juice that comes out, in a good year, will hit about 38 to 40 bricks. Now, remember, Chardonnay, we pick between 22 and 25. In a good year, we can hit 48 or even 52 bricks, which is unusually concentrated. From there, we get the juice clear, we settle it. We might put it through some coarse filtration to clear it up. It goes into usually 4 and 5 year aged American oak barrels. So wood that's been seasoned an extra long time before being made into a barrel. And then we ferment it in barrel. It ferments for about 9 months. And then when it's finished fermenting, it just naturally stops and we bottle it.
So that's not a wine you can make every year then. If it doesn't work out, I guess you can't make it every year.
Yeah. So sometimes we'll get mold too early. And so we get these rotten underripe grapes. Other years we'll get it to almost where we want it. And then it dumps rain and we lose the crop. So it's a real challenge. So we try and make it most years. And usually about every 2 to 3, we get a little bit, usually every 3.
Yeah. Well, that must be why it's sold out then.
Yeah, like some years we might get enough to make 1,000 cases. The next, we might not get into next year, and then we might get a year where we only make 400 cases or 300 cases of it. So it's a labor of love. The other thing as well is it always wants to turn the vinegar, right? Because it's so high in sugar, and it's taken me a long time to learn how to really make it and perfect it. I actually had to call one of my old bosses back in Australia who used to work for a company in Australia that made Australia's most famous dessert wine. And I called him and asked how he did it. And he gave me these really rudimentary instructions. Get the juice clear and ferment it till you hit the legal limit of volatile acidity. That's all we do. And I was like, okay, so that's what we do. It's really somewhat simple. It's just stressful.
Well, it's one of my favorites, so I'm glad to hear that.
It's actually my favorite wine to make because it's so rare. We don't get to do it every year, so it's my favorite wine to make.
Well, I'm look forward to being able to buy more. So,
yeah, well, later this year.
As
I said, we're bottling it next week.
Okay. So anyhow, Richie, this has been awesome. Like I said, I could sit on here and we could talk for hours about wine and all that stuff. But yeah, but I appreciate it. The last question I have for you, just real quick, is the 2022 harvest that's coming up. How is everything looking? What are your expectations for that so far?
Yeah, so far, we're in a drought. So we're in a drought last year. The big difference was we had really good rain before Christmas, which filled up our soil profiles. So we started off okay. We just didn't get enough rain after Christmas. We got enough to fill our reservoirs, but the available moisture in the soil has been using up quick. So, we're in a better position than last year. The challenge we had this spring was we had a lot of frost. So Cabernet for us didn't really get hit. Some people up on Atlas Peak and on the hillsides got hit with frost. Chardonnay, there's a few tiny spots here and there. For the most part, it's okay. But up in the Sierra Foothills, we had a late spring frost and we got hammered. So it was very challenging. It's very, very mixed. Some blocks are worse than others. When you get a frost on those little young shoots, it damages them and they don't grow. So I'm anticipating a smaller crop for Zinfandel, but everything else so far is tracking okay. It'd just be really good this winter to get average or even better, well above average rainfall for the future, because where we're at in terms of a drought cycle, we just need rain. I don't know what the solution is other than rain. So, I mean, we're very careful of how we manage water. We have some vineyards that are incredibly limited in water and effectively dry farmed. Where we do have lots of available water, We only add enough for the vines to get by, and we monitor soil moisture. We monitor the amount of the turgor pressure of the vine, called a pressure balm, and then we measure the amount of evapotranspiration off the vineyard area. So we're never adding or wasting water. We never irrigate unless we absolutely have to. But even still, we need to top up the soil moisture profile. Irrigation is not a solution to long-term drought. I'll put it that way. So we'll see. But we're in a better spot than last year. Just pray for no fires. We can have this conversation again in November where I'll either be a very happy man or drinking a whole bottle of Chardonnay to myself.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, no kidding. Well, thank you so much, Richie. You've been awesome, and I'm a huge fan of yours, and I love Rombauer and the winemaking team. Everybody is so awesome there. So I look forward to continuing to drink the awesome wine that you guys make, and just thank you for everything. I appreciate it.
Well, cheers. Thank you for having me on the show, mate, and always love the chat, and would love it if you ever want to come back and work harvest again. We'd love to have you back.
I want to thank Richie for dedicating so much time for this interview and giving us such great insight into what makes Rombauer wines so great. If you haven't experienced some of the great Zinfandels or Cabernet Sauvignons we talked about tonight, I encourage you to go to rombauer.com or visit one of their beautiful tasting rooms. You better hurry though, these wines do sell out quickly. As most of you know, I had the opportunity to work with Richie and the Rombauer team for the harvest in 2021, and it was awesome. If you love wine, I encourage you to try to get involved with a winery during harvest. It's something you'll never forget. Finally tonight, I want to encourage you to visit the all-new show website at www.obsessedwithwine.net for everything related to the show. Also, don't forget to sign up for the Obsessed with Wine newsletter. Please join me next week for another new episode of Obsessed with Wine podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Cheers!